Now it's your opportunity to quiz the presentations. I'm joined on the stage by Dr. Helen Ferrier, who's the NFU's Chief Science and Regulatory Affairs Advisor. Helen will be able to contribute to some of the answers. I suspect many of you got questions already, so we've got two microphones, so Suki on this side and Imogen on that side. So make yourself known by holding your hand up, and then I can actually see you, and we direct microphones in. We'll kick off straight away with presentation, one there and one there.
Thank you. Tom Allen Stevens, Oxfordshire farmer and editor of CPM. My question's on gene editing. Alison and Helen, as you know, Michael Gove attended a round table it was a cross-industry round table on gene editing last week. And specifically, it was represented by the UK plant science institutes who are doing world-leading research in this area, and they expressed that to Michael Gove. It was also evident that research needs to go on. And this, I stress this was a cross-industry forum, and even those organizations who are against gene editing agreed that this research must go on. But as you know, the GMO regulations are unfit for purpose. We have been handed down by the European Court of Justice GMO regulations that are unfit for purpose. And there is the opportunity to diverge when we Brexit. So, Alison, what is it about the regulations that's holding you back, that's holding your research back, and what is the one thing that you'd change?
I think the thing that always comes up is that these are solutions that work. We show can work in the lab. We can validate something. We can make it happen. We can do that very quickly now, through 36 weeks, to prove that something works. But it's always the barrier that we're not able to take it any further. And I think the opportunity for the industry to engage in those solutions without a certainty about what the policy or regulatory aspects of it would be, to not be able to make that contribution. So as public sector researchers, we can do the research, publish the papers, but I think it's the pull through for that into delivering impacts to people and into the industry that is a big barrier. Helen, do you have anything to?
Yeah. Well, I just think that the research that we're all paying for as taxpayers in places like NIAB is, the value of that to us is being lost, and the commercialisation of the UK's fantastic science and research happening in other parts of the world, and then actually we're buying back the products of that. That just seems the wrong way of doing things. And I think that Michael Gove is positive about technological developments, but obviously that has to translate into an enabling regulatory environment. Otherwise, the commercial players are still not going to touch Europe and the UK, and for all the fantastic science in the world, you still need those commercial companies to turn that into something that farmers can put in the ground.
Alison, do you think that we're too focused on the method of modifying genes and not about the benefits that consumers might have? Because that seems to be one of the principal barriers, and we talk about net zero agriculture this morning and the need for some of this sort of developments. Is that way of unlocking public resistance towards and media resistance towards this technique?
Yeah, I think it comes back to Tom's point about the kind of framework not being fit for purpose, and it is very focused on the method used to produce something. So with the example of gene editing, you can produce a plant that is clean of any evidence that it's been edited. So there's no selectable marker, there's no evidence. So I would not know by looking at that plant at a molecular level that it was produced by a mutagen, by natural process, or by gene editing. So we regulate the process that was used to make it, but the product, it's undetectable within the product. So I think focusing more on the challenge, the thing that we're trying to do, what is the best set of tools that we can use to get there? Obviously, there's a safety element which has to be incorporated, but if I can't tell the difference when I look at something at the DNA sequence level, I don't know if I've gamma irradiated a bag of seed and produced that by chance, or if I've used a very specific molecular tool that I have a lot of control over, I can't distinguish the end product. So I think we're focused on declaring the method and very fixated on that method of delivery rather than on the outcome and the product that's created and the value of that product.
Okay. Right, okay. Question there, and then go back one, and here. Sorry. Is it on?
It's a two-part question, this. I'm very, very keen to see innovation moving up the hill, and I think there is a place within hill farming in the UK to employ some of the different techniques and technologies that are being developed. So I quite like the cow monitoring, but it needs to be a little bit wider monitoring process and looking at plant species. So my question is, what drives research? Is it the farmer's want or the market potential of a product? Because at that stage, if it is the latter, we haven't got hope and hope.
Neither of the above.
Very good question. What drives research?
Do you want me to take that?
Yeah, go then.
It's a really combination of both. So I actually believe these technologies have got a place for use in the hill. I don't think it's going to be cow Fitbits necessarily. I think it's going to be potentially drone systems monitoring the animals. There's challenges getting the data off these, and we can look at different approaches using drones. The problem is, though, for the research that we do, it's funded by Innovate UK, represented in the room. Sorry, I caught your eye, Callum. And it's the commercial opportunity. Now, that's not to say that we're not looking at these other things as well. So I've actually got a student at the moment who is doing a student project. You're helping me. We have a drone pilot here that's helping us with that, and we're looking at the way we can get sheep at the moment actually to follow a drone. So I was very interested to see in the I forget the name of it, the document that was launched this morning.
Yeah,
the future, yeah, exactly. There's talk in there of using the virtual fence collars. I've actually got a few problems with those, and I don't think those should be the flagship technology we're going to take to the hill, because as soon as the Daily Mail or Daily Express hears about shock collars, and you can see the headlines, there's going to be problems. And I think we can actually use positive reinforcement. They don't. I think there's huge problems with those technically as well, because they're using GPS. So I think, I'm not sure if I've really quite answered your question. It's a combination of we are addressing the concerns of hill farmers. That is sort of my passion. I was actually spent all of my formative years on a hill farm in Swaledale, all my school holidays in Swaledale. And I'm very keen that we take these technologies, because I think there's huge improvements can be made. And if anything, we're applying them really at the wrong end of the sort of the industry that's already fairly intensive. And it's not going to make their systems more intensive, it's going to make them more efficient, but also it's going to help us manage the agro-environmental benefits that they give. And I very strongly believe, the cultural and heritage landscape of the UK and much of Europe, it's the mouths of grazing ruminants that maintain that, and we need to find ways of supporting that agriculture. Public money will be going into that, and possibly the public money might support some of those technologies. So don't worry, we are thinking about you. It's maybe an area Innovate UK might be more interested in funding in the future, possibly, I don't know, but I think it's an area where we will see the technology moving. And as we learn more about from the dairy cow, we will take that technology to the hill.
Okay, right. A question here.
Hi, I'm Dan Leonard. I'm a vet. I've got a question about the data side that you were talking about. I totally agree with you about collaborating and opening up data sources. And in the kind of work that I do within the veterinary industry, I meet no end of people who are inventing the next web-based tool or app or solution that's going to have all the data and connect to everything. And obviously they're all commercially driven. People have invested in them. There's man hours invested. Several different people doing similar-ish projects. And my question to you is, where do you see the role, or how do we get the winners to come out of that group and coalesce? And in other countries that you mentioned, you've got government and industry-led schemes to drive central database stuff and start somewhere. And I feel our industry's and government are far too fragmented at the minute. I'd just be interested in some comments about how we're going to get this data connectivity between the relevant data and the relevant invested corporations plus government, etc., to join together. Just if you've got a few comments on that.
Julian, yeah.
I think there's a couple of things I'll say about that. One is sort of at a technical level, there are still huge issues as kind of interoperability of data. So, data being stored in different formats and not being able, one system not being able to talk to another. It's the classic sort of mobile phone charger sort of type scenario. There is a lot of work going on in that space at the moment. There's one or two new businesses that have emerged that are looking to become sort of data aggregators, sort of data engines in that space to be able to deal with that better. It was really kind of the thinking that was behind the formation of agrimetrics as a sort of a big data aggregator and a ability to pull data together and allow it to be shared and used in different scenarios. Not all of those are working brilliantly yet, and you're absolutely right, there is duplication, not only in this country, but around the world. I mean, the number of projects that I come across and I think to myself, I'm sure someone else is doing almost exactly that, building something the same that's getting funded in some other way somewhere else in another country. I guess some of that is the nature of innovation. People, it's kind of the democratization, if you like, of innovation. But your other point around data sharing, how do we get that data shared better? There is some work that's going on under the auspices of the Food and Drink Sector Council work. There's two streams of work, and one is the agricultural productivity piece, and under that there are a number of subcommittees that have been formed, and one of them has been looking into this issue of kind of how do we have a more central, or potentially have a more sort of centralised approach to sharing government data, and that paper is actually going forward at the moment to the Agricultural Productivity Working Group stream of the Sector Council work. That hasn't been published yet, but I've been party to its content, and that is looking at potentially how government and industry can take a lead in a combined way to find better solutions to being able to share data. Now, whether that is actually a centralised sort of government system, or whether it's a centralised independent system, or whether it's actually what we've done in New Zealand, which is actually creating more of a sort of democratised network type approach where we have common schemas and standards for sharing data, but actually there isn't one central database that everyone's pushing data into, and there's some obvious concerns around that. But that work is absolutely looking exactly in the spot that you're talking about to see if we can take a lead and actually come up with through the Sector Council work to actually say, what do we want in this country to foster the innovation that will come out of better data sharing. Now, exactly what that looks like, I can't necessarily predict, but that work is ongoing at the moment, and we do need to get to a place where we are doing this a lot better, in the ways that they're doing it better in the Netherlands, they're doing it better in Scandinavia and other countries around the world, where they, to be fair, they seem to be less worried about sharing data as well. I think they kind of see more, it's a bit like the GM sort of debate, they're less worried about the problems around it, they're more interested in the opportunities out of it. And I think that's what I mean about the cultural change. I think that in this country we need to have a bit of a shift there as well to being more pro sharing data, albeit under good terms of reference, if you like, which is the work we're doing under the code.
Okay. Any other points, Mark?
Just briefly, I think Michael Gove alluded to it. There is the Livestock Information Service. So that's something that DEFRA are looking. Now, again, I fully agree that we're not going to have one single central database. I think it's going to be a network of sort of cloud-based service, sort of sharing information, but we need common standards to do that. But I think the Livestock Information Service, which is implementing cattle EID in the short term, electronic identification is the core technology within precision livestock farming. So that could be the backbone on which these other things hang.
I think most farmers in Rome want to make sure that actually it's economical in terms of application as well. I mean, many tractor cabs when there's 3 or 4 different computers operating different bits of machinery. So the hardware's got to work as well as the software, and the machine's got to talk to each other. The back there. Yeah.
Question for Mark. How far can this innovation go in contributing to the animal welfare debate? For example, could you get to the point where you were monitoring cortisol or even dopamine and starting to quantify the positive and negative emotions within livestock?
That's a good question. I think in the short term, there's going to be challenges around that, but never say never. There is the herd navigator Delaval product, which sits on their robot, which is measuring beta-hydroxybutyrate, lactate dehydrogenase, progesterone. So we are looking at some measures in there. I think, to be honest, we can probably, I think the beauty of having more than one sensor system, and it doesn't have to be single sensors, lots of sensors on each cow. You can have these static sensor platforms like the 3D camera. You can have roving sensor platforms, moving around, monitoring your animals. The more sensors we have, the more we can integrate that data, the better we can understand what's going on. And we can allude a lot about what's going on in the animal's brain in terms of positive and negative, in terms of its behavior. So I think one of the most powerful technologies that's coming to market now are these cow positioning systems. And the challenge there is that that's completely leapfrogged the research. So as a researcher, we never had access to that sort of tool. But suddenly we know where every single cow in the building is, and I think we could look at social behaviour. And I think probably one of the biggest stresses that cows have, it's not the farmer, it's not the environment, it's other cows. And if we can start to understand that better, even just from the perspective of researchers, I think we can possibly manage that. And there might be ways of isolating. Maybe we get aggressive cows. I think the dominant cow is not necessarily the aggressive one. It's some cows in the middle who are trying to work their way up. Can we identify them, sell them, and maybe your herd stress levels go down and the yields go up? So I think there's going to be some exciting technologies coming along, and a lot of it will come out of integration. But it's coming to the point you made earlier. You can't have lots of different black boxes on farm. They all need to talk to each other. And I think there's a market there for tech companies in terms of being the integrator. We're the one that help bring this data together, but we also need common data exchange standards. So I think we're going to, I think it's a very exciting time, and we're going to see a lot of, when we do start to integrate these technologies, I think we're going to see some fantastic tools there to help manage stock.
Thank you, Mark. Right, any other points? No? I've got
My name is Tim Loynick. I work at DEFRA, and it's a question on the hands-free hectare. Where did robots prove to be surprisingly effective, and you can imagine them coming along quite soon, and where were they really pretty darn hopeless, and you don't expect to see them anytime soon?
Oh, fantastic. The whole reason why we did the hectare in the first place was to find out the questions that we didn't know how to ask in the first place. The biggest thing that came to the most advantage is the agronomy. The agronomy aspect, where you can really look after the plants to the level that you wouldn't be able to in the first place. Agronomist is generally just a single person and has to walk all the fields. If you've got the ability to send multiple vehicles out to go and gather samples to then be analysed at home or somewhere else in a different environment to increase that capability, well, that's definitely one of the enhancements. And in fact, one of the cooperative of the drone SIG that we run at the university has taken one of my, bets against our agronomists to do a quadrat test, now taking it on to the next level of the Skippy Scout, so having the capability of having a small vehicle measure multiple areas in the first place. So the agronomy is definitely the largest area to focus on beforehand. The other aspect is, it's just a tractor that we've been working on in the first place to drive up and down. Now that's kind of been solved. It's more the smart implements that go on the back of it. It's doing the work in the first place. A vehicle driving around without anything behind of it is just doing recreational compaction with no reason at all. So it needs to be doing something in the first place and doing it well and precisely. Less inputs, less energy, less tillage, traffic, all these other things. That's the most area. So agronomy and smart implements, I would say, are the biggest things that we've kind of learned on in there. And the other ones I'm probably going to keep a bit more secret.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. Peter Gadd, farmer grower, AHDB cereals and oilseeds, and NFU combinable crops. This is a question for Dr. Alison Bentley. It's two-part, Alison. First of all, fairly specifically, in recent times, we've seen big advances in the improvement of photosynthetic efficiency through the bypassing of systems within plants. How soon do you think that could become a commercial reality on farms and produce a step change in productive output through increased biomass and probably nutrient use efficiency? And also, on a more general breeding question, where you were talking about overexpression of traits to improve a plant's performance, that very often goes hand in hand with a penalty, either in a yield reduction or a trait that's compromised. Is there any way with current technology and new breeding techniques that we can overcome that penalty aspect and maintain the overexpression benefits?
Yeah, so both of those are great questions. I think all of the work on photosynthesis, so manipulating components of the Calvin cycle, all those fundamental parts of photosynthesis, have been largely based on GM intervention, so switching on or switching off specific genes in those pathways. So I think it comes back to the original question of how soon we can see those things released into the public domain, because all of the evidence is very strong that you can manipulate genes within those pathways and boost yield. A lot of that work's been done in tobacco and cowpea, so other species, but could be easily applied. So that, I think there's definitely good evidence for those gains. We're looking for similar gains in some of the wild relatives, so trying to seek novel breeding strategies which use native trait diversity to bring through analogous characteristics into material. But I think unless we're able to deploy GM solutions very rapidly, realizing that those gains that you see in those experiments in a short time frame is unlikely. Although obviously understanding some of those mechanisms is very important, because then we can go into the breeding material and look for natural variation which we can exploit. And then to come on to the question about overexpression, I think it's a very good one. Whenever you upregulate something always downregulates, so there's always a trade-off with the different aspects when we play around with them. And what we're trying to do is to kind of make those constructs that we use for gene editing or genetic modification bigger, so we can kind of have a push-pull, so we can put the accelerator down and the brake on another. And the technology is now at a level of readiness where we're able to do that much more effectively, so to compensate for something that we're also increasing. So we're moving very much in the direction of being able to do that, and the technology is certainly allowing that to happen at a much more rapid pace.
Okay. Right, and there's one more on the front here as well, and then I'm going to go back there.
Neil Sadler, dairy farmer from Shropshire. I'm going to play devil's advocate here a little bit. 13 years ago, I put a robot in to start milking my cows, and immediately was, the amount of data I had available to me to work with was incredible. 13 years on, I've probably used about 2% of it. Are we in danger of getting data overload? There's also areas where farmers have used heat detection, electronic heat detection methods, and now gone back to RMS because it's a lot more simple, a lot more reliable, and a lot cheaper.
That's a really good question. I'm looking forward to seeing how the audience, Julian, because too much data, and how do we use it? Because we get lots and lots of figures, but what's it mean?
Yes, thank you, Neil.
Has he asked you this question before?
No, I've sort of felt it might be coming. I think you're right, and it's actually, you shouldn't be interested in data, you should be interested in information, and I think that is the problem, is that we haven't been good enough at converting data into useful information. I think we're getting better at it, and I think there's been a bit too much of a drive. I have to be careful, I've got an engineering person sitting next to me, an engineer, to get these technologies. Where can we use these technologies? And I think they're going to have a huge impact, and they are having a huge impact. But we have to make sure that we're providing the information that farmers need. So I fully take on board your comments, and I think we do need to do more about trying to get that converted, because I don't really believe I don't think we need that many more new sensors. I think we need to do a lot more smarter things with the data that we're getting. And I think, again, and I'll come back to it, the point I made earlier, data integration. When you can start to take data from multiple systems, you can actually, there's true synergy there. So, the value you get out of it is greater than the sum of the parts. You can have much more sophisticated diagnosis by looking across them. I'll be patient, is what I'm saying. I'm hoping it won't take another 13 years, but I think we are starting to get there. And I know it's an area that, Innovate UK, I think, are interested in supporting bids in those sorts of applications as well.
And Julian?
Yeah, I mean, I would totally support that. I mean, I think that it's nonsensical for a farmer to be spending hours and hours trawling through loads of data. Okay, I mean, you're busy guys anyway, and the whole point of some of these data-driven solutions is to help you, not to hinder you. So, but I think what we have to do is get to a point where you are able to get the information that allows you to make the meaningful interventions that you need to make. Now, what you shouldn't underestimate, though, is sometimes those meaningful interventions might seemingly be quite few, but they might be driven by a mass of data that sits underneath it. So if you take the cow alert system, for instance, the way that's kind of set up actually is to give you alerts to identify animals that are kind of outside the norm on the bell curve, if you like. So the ones that are kind of either lying down an awful lot more than the others or not at all or whatever. And they're the ones that you go and check. So you get an alert that says go and check cow number 3 or number 10 or whatever. Now you may only need to check 6 cows or something in a herd of 180 cows, say, and you might seemingly think, I'm not really using a huge amount of data that's going into this, but actually there's a massive data and computational effort that's gone in behind that, and clever algorithms and things that are actually working out things like how do you detect estrus based on a cow's how its mobility and all these sorts of other things. So I agree with you totally that where we've got to get to now is really good dashboards and sort of alert systems that are drawing on this massive data set, but actually allow you to really spend limited amount of time in front of the screen and just giving you the pointers to make the interventions that you need to make that are based on that data. Yeah.
Okay, I think I recognise the speaker, Jack. You got.
Well, I've got a question and comment, and then a comment masked as a question. First, on the comment, one of the questions about data and overexpression. So one of the things our company is working on is switches, so we can turn on and off different traits. So if you're somebody who grows alfalfa, we just turn off the flowering of alfalfa, and you never have to worry about when you harvest it, and you never have to worry about it outcrossing to your neighbors. Drought tolerance, you turn off drought tolerance until there's a drought, and you only pay for the gene when you use it. So I think that there's exciting opportunities in how that's going to work in the future. My real question relates, though, to the regulatory piece, and I'm curious what the people on the podium think about when the question about is the regulatory system in Europe fit for purpose. I think it's kind of the wrong question. I think that the US and Europe both regulate GM in very similar ways. The question is there's a political vote at the end of a regulatory process, and so I think whether or not the European system will work in the UK is whether or not there's political will. And so it's much less about the nature of the process itself and whether or not the leadership wants products to come out the other end. And so I think that that's going to have a lot to do with whether or not the farmers and others actually want those technologies. So I think that's a conversation to have, is whether or not there's the political will. So I'm curious if others see it that way. It may be a little bit different with gene editing than GM, but I think it's relevant.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to kick off on? Or Helen?
Tricky questions is what it's all about. Yeah, I think the political will issue is interesting. When I started at the NFU in 2004, that was just at the end of the farm scale evaluations. I'm sure many in this room will remember that. And we had a Labour government, and we had quite a pro-technology Labour government. And lots of people were saying, well, yes, nothing's going to happen really in terms of commercial cultivation for kind of 5 years or so. That was in 2004. And at that time, the opposition Conservative government was, a bit problematic in terms of its approach to biotechnology. And then where we are now, I think we have a government who is very pro-technology, and Michael Gove continues to say helpful things. And potentially we have who knows what the colour of the government will be in future, but I think the current Labour government is much less keen on these kinds of controversial technologies. So yeah, political will, very interesting how it ebbs and flows. But I think also in terms of the kind of research funding landscape, funders seem to be quite interested in moonshots at the moment, aren't you, Callum, looking at our Innovate UK friend over there. But, moonshots, this idea that you've got these really big challenges and that you can throw a lot of big brains at them, and money, of course, to get some answers to really big challenges. And clearly there are some massive societal and environmental challenges generally, and a lot of them are related to agriculture, or a lot of, I would say, the answers lie actually in agricultural systems. So if we can talk about those kinds of societal challenges and then discuss all the possible and probable tools that there are to address those, then that's a much better way of talking about biotechnology rather than just focusing on individual technologies. It's kind of easier to do that because we've got experts who are working on robotics or biotechnology. But actually what we're trying to do, and what politicians are interested in and what people are interested in, is solving problems, however that's done. And so I think switching it around like that is probably the way to go.
Any other observations from colleagues? Julian?
I think I would just say that it seems to me that it's not a vote winner at the moment, and I think until there's a sort of a public clamour for the benefits of what might come out of GM, and then the politicians realise there's some votes in it, then we may get a change. But I just don't think there's the sort of a mood amongst the voters at the moment for it, because there is just this lack of demonstrable benefit, really. And I think you're absolutely right, we should be talking a lot more about the outcomes of GM and less about the technology itself.
Okay, got one question at the back there. And there are opportunities for anybody else at the back to ask a question. I don't want you to feel it's just about people at the front. There's one there.
Thank you. Harry Mitchell from British Sugar. I speak on behalf of the UK homegrown sugar industry, where we've seen a 25% increase in sugar beet yields in the past 10 years. And that's all down to innovation within our sector. And at the heart of that has been the supply of data from our growers to us at British Sugar to pass out to our lead world-class scientists at the British Beet Research Organisation. And that's down to a really strong data agreement that we've got, an interprofessional agreement between growers and NFU Sugar and us at British Sugar in order to see that drive forward. But there are many sectors within agriculture where farmers are sceptical with regards to where their data is going, and they think it's going to be used for commercial gain, which I think is also at the heart of the issue too. So my question is to Julian, is to say, how do we, in front of a room of farmers, win the trust of farmers in order to really drive benefits for our industry? Because we've done it in sugar, but how else can we do it across the wider agriculture sector?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think the premise of the code, of the work that we've been doing in developing this code of practice is really around this notion of transparency. And I think that actually solves a lot of problems if the parties in sharing data are being transparent about where it's going, how it's being used, and to what purpose. And so really the way we have constructed the code is to encourage that transparency and really say that if you're if you're British Sugar and you're using data, if you are not being clear with your farmers how you're going to use it, where it's going to be stored, who else might be looking at it, and to what purposes. Is it going to be anonymised? Is it going, how's it going to be aggregated? All those sorts of things, which I think you probably are doing pretty well, and you're probably an example of good practice in this space. If we don't have that transparency, then you don't have the trust. And so, as I said in my presentation, I think the code itself is only one step. It's only one building block in this process. But I think we have to start somewhere, and I think until we've got some sort of framework around which industry can coalesce and say, actually, yeah, we think this is a good way to go. We think this is a good set of rules, albeit it's a voluntary code we're proposing, but we think this is a good set of rules, and if I can see that badge of honour, if you like, against British Sugar who signed up to the code or someone else, then I should be able to know as a farmer that I can trust them, that they're actually looking after my data and using my data in a fair and reasonable way. So I do think it's about transparency, and I think in the IPA that you guys have, there's some good work in that, which you've actually tackled quite a long time ago, actually, when you look at it.
Okay. Good. Right, I think I've got one more question here, and if that's it.
Yeah. Andrew Wilson, tenant farmer from North Yorkshire. I've been watching the hands-free hectare with interest for some time now, and as a practical chap on the ground myself, it's a little bit baffling in some ways that you've not used it for things like veg picking, an area of our industry that's desperately struggling for labour, that is labour intensive, that is quite repetitive and is quite slow. From an arable perspective, we're a crowded island. We've had 3-4 generations now of people getting less and less and less in farming. Is technology replacing people? Are those people going to be doing something really, really different? To me, the idea of trying to round up a dozen robots and work out which one's got the issues is far more difficult than steering a tractor driver in the right direction. Things like grain carting from the combine back to the yard. We've got crowded roads, we've got a lot of people that park in silly places in villages. The practicalities of roboticising arable farming seems very much more unachievable compared to what you could gain in a veg field.
I love this idea of robot having issues.
This is a good one, okay.
Yeah,
I feel I'm definitely in the firing line for this one. But, however, the main reason why we tried to do this was a perfect moonshot. Everybody was saying it was completely impossible, so we wanted to show the capabilities of what it was. If we didn't do it, nobody would be actually talking about what we've able to achieve. The really exciting things that we wanted to start breaking down the barriers of. I overlook a field that has traffic and tillage compaction problems on it, and it constantly has an increased yield over the areas that has less compaction and decreased yield on areas of compaction. The ideas of having smaller vehicles running over it and doing it in a precision farm methodology allows us to try and break down this barrier of yield. That was the first aspect of trying to have smaller vehicles, smaller, more precise implements on the back of them, allowing us to get closer to that single plant level. And that's the reason why we stuck with an arable particular area. Now, the reason why we had a constrained hectare in the first area with a fence around it was because it was going to be a big challenge that not even the large agricultural companies wanted to break down. But this last year, we've not just stuck at working on the hands-free hectare. We're working on navigation from our farmyard site to our field across 5 different ways of mobility, GPS denied and everything else, dealing with people in the way, trying to break down those barriers of, stupid people parking their vehicles in the way of a combine or whatever, but having the autonomous capability to deal with that. And also adding the capabilities of having algorithms to work out smart grain carting within fields and everything else. I find it completely crazy that we've got 20, 30 ton chaser systems running around in field, adding increased compaction over lines that we've been trying to decrease it in the first place. Is there a better way of doing that? And what we're trying to do is just add different ways of thinking and different technologies to enable ourselves to think out the box completely. The ideas of using drone systems to spray and treat fields in a non-linear fashion by only targeting areas of first emergence in comparison to just targeting it as a continuous single block baffles me. So if there's a way that I can use a drone to literally target those, I will try and use that technology to break down these barriers, think completely out the box, and okay, it might not be the perfect solution at the moment, but having some of these ideas might allow us to solve some of the solutions that we might need in the future. And that's the reason why it's a bit of a moonshot and a bit crazy. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Any other? Right, look, we're coming towards the end of it, so if there's no more questions, I was going to have my last question myself, which is, I just wanted to ask the presenters, if you were looking at your technology, what's the single biggest barrier to adoption? Because everybody in the audience here, the reason there are so many people here is that they're innovators. Farmers are naturally innovators. They want to look what the future is. They want to make a difference. We asked you to come and present today about cutting-edge innovation and game-changing innovation. And I'd like to know what it is that you could do to make this easy, this transition from this side out into the audience. So there's actually practically in fields making a difference, making more profitable farm businesses, more sustainable farm businesses. So I'd go down the line. What's the thing that's your game-changing removal of a barrier and adoption?
Well, I think with GM and gene editing, I think we've covered the bases on that. I think we have a UK science base which is extraordinary, and there is the potential for it to be transformational. And I think the downside is the barrier to provide the differentiated products. So that pull through of this demand for a differentiated product, however it's created, I would say is a barrier, because it's what's holding back the ability to catalyse what we have in the UK science base and really deliver that to a farmer.
Yeah, so political appetite.
Cool. My particular one is that, well, my Nuffield scholarship was completely on how do we embrace automation in agriculture, and it's an educational aspect of how do we really take on this technology to allow us to push further and further. I've had so many people come to me over the past 8 years talking about drone systems being the next silver bullet to solve agricultural problems, but over the 8 years, nothing has really come to light to allow anybody to increase their yields to epic amounts to do that. What I really like today, it's down to the education and understanding what the technology's capability is really now. And that's why we run workshops at the university for things like the Drones for Agriculture or Drones for Farming conference we're running at the university on the 9th of April to allow us to showcase what's really possible and now, and allow us to show what cheap technology can increase your yields and understand more about what's going on in the first place. It's all about the educational aspect to start embracing that. And if you can understand it, you'll start using it more and more and get the information from the data instead of just be baffled with data.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Mark?
I think we need to make the benefits more tangible. So I think we need to make it clear, what is this thing saving you? So here's an alert, your cow is lame. If you don't act on that today, it's going to cost you X pounds. If you don't act on it tomorrow, it's going to cost you even more. I think having some economic tangibility to those benefits, and I think they would start off as generic, but the beauty of precision livestock farming is it's closing the circle. So that would actually, there'd be a black box approach, and it would be fine tuning. You'd be putting your costs in, and it would be fine tuning to your individual farm. So you'd be able to see far more quickly, actually, yeah, I need to do something about that. It's going to cost me money if I don't.
Thank you, Mark. And Julian?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I sort of stick to the data theme, then I you know, given the work we've been doing in the last 6 months, I just think this thing of demonstration and sort of knowledge exchange around the benefits of doing this stuff is absolutely key. And I think until, you know, companies involved in this space, until they really wake up to that and really start to understand the importance of demonstrating to all of you the benefits and sharing that information and that knowledge exchange piece, until we start doing that really well, it's still going to be uphill. It's not going to stop it, because I think the momentum is there and there's an awful lot of stuff that's gone on. But I think you guys would probably, you know, if you had the time, and you're busy people, but if you had the time to really know the amount of stuff that's out there that you could be using now, you'd probably be amazed. And the fact that you would be amazed suggests to me that we've kind of got a knowledge exchange problem there, if you like, and a demonstration problem. So that's where I would sort of, you know, say is a big challenge.
Okay, and finally, Helen?
Yeah, I think we have to get greater value from the research pound that is spent, and this is part of a lot of work that I'm doing at the moment with colleagues at AHD to try and have a look at the research landscape and the knowledge exchange landscape, to try and get the competition that exists within the research community more healthy, incentivise collaboration between scientists, but also collaboration between the science community and the practitioner, the industry, the commercial community, getting that join up and that knowledge exchange working properly. And I really think that if we can get this initiative that we're talking about going, we could have a long-term partnership between the practitioner, the industry, the science community and government to get more value from research in the UK and to be a leader in getting that system right.
Great. Okay, look, I hope you found this afternoon's session useful, interesting. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd like you to just join me in showing your appreciation for the speakers.